I was staring at my doorbell camera footage when the third certified letter arrived in 5 days, and I knew Vista Verde HOA had crossed a line I could not ignore. I moved to Overland Park, Kansas 6 months earlier for a network engineering job at a data center downtown, and I picked this lakefront community because the dock access and water views seemed worth the HOA fees. The Vista Verde HOA board ran the neighborhood like a fiefdom, and the welcome committee chair, a blonde woman named Judith Remington who went by Linda, treated every new resident like a compliance project. My contractor was scheduled for ice dam repairs in 48 hours, and if I missed that window, the cancellation fee would hit hard. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks ago when Linda left a door hanger on my porch after a heavy snowfall, the paper soaked and curling at the edges, declaring my front handrail a safety violation because frost had built up on the metal. I thought it was a joke. It was not a joke. Linda showed up the next morning with a clipboard and a reflective vest, even though she held no official inspection authority. She stood in my driveway and said the frost on the handrail violated a safety code she refused to cite by number, and she was issuing a formal notice. I asked her to show me the specific rule. She tapped her clipboard and said, "I have witnesses, so do not lie to me." I had no idea what she meant by that, but I made a mental note. I told her I would address the handrail as soon as the weather allowed, and she said I had 72 hours or the fines would start. I went inside and checked the HOA covenant documents. There was no handrail frost rule. There was a general maintenance clause, but it was vague and unenforceable for weather-related conditions. I sent Linda an email asking for clarification. She replied with a single sentence, "Compliance is not optional." The next day, another door hanger appeared. This one with a $15 per day fine schedule printed in block letters, the ink smeared by melting snow. I work in network engineering, so I understand access logs and audit trails. I started documenting everything. I saved every email, every door hanger, every timestamp from my doorbell camera. The camera had a snow cap on the lens from the last storm, but the footage was still clear enough to show Linda approaching my property at odd hours, sometimes after dark, always carrying that clipboard. I also started logging the Vista Verde HOA board meeting minutes posted online, and I noticed a pattern. Linda had a history of targeting new residents with invented violations, and the board always backed her up until someone threatened legal action. I was not the first, but I planned to be the last. My friend Marcus works in IT and specializes in metadata verification. I called him and explained the situation. He told me to keep everything timestamped and to request copies of any official records the HOA generated. He also told me to watch for evidence tampering, because HOA boards sometimes alter meeting minutes after the fact to cover their tracks. The certified letters started arriving on a Tuesday. The first one repeated the handrail violation and added a new claim: my driveway snow removal was inadequate, creating a hazard for mail carriers. I had cleared my driveway the same morning. I checked the doorbell footage and confirmed the timestamp. The second letter arrived Thursday and accused me of parking a vehicle in a non-designated area, even though my car was in my own driveway. The third letter arrived Saturday and threatened a lien if I did not pay the accumulated fines by Monday. I was furious, but I kept my responses calm and factual. I replied to each letter with a short email disputing the claims and attaching doorbell camera screenshots. Linda did not respond to the emails, but she posted a message in the neighborhood group chat accusing me of ignoring safety violations and endangering the community. She did not name me directly, but everyone knew who she meant. Several neighbors messaged me privately to say they had dealt with similar harassment and advised me to lawyer up. I was not ready to spend money on an attorney yet, but I was ready to escalate my evidence collection. Marcus came over Sunday afternoon and helped me pull the metadata from the doorbell camera files. We verified the timestamps matched the dates and times Linda claimed I was violating rules, and in every case, the footage contradicted her claims. Marcus also suggested I contact the tow company Linda had name-dropped in one of the group chat messages, because towing without legal authority is a liability issue. I called the dispatch line and asked if Vista Verde HOA had an active contract for violation tows. The dispatcher said they had a standing agreement, but individual tow requests required specific authorization from the board president or property manager, not just a committee chair. I asked if they kept dispatch logs. She said yes, and I made another mental note. I wrote down every word she said, because later I planned to read them back to Linda. The ice dam contractor called Monday morning to confirm the Wednesday appointment. He said if I canceled, the fee was $200 and rescheduling would push into late February when his rates doubled. I told him I would be ready. That same morning, Linda posted another message in the neighborhood group chat, this time with a photo of my house taken from the street, calling out the frosted handrail and the driveway snow line. She wrote that residents who refused to comply with safety standards were putting everyone at risk. I replied publicly for the first time, stating I had documentation proving all violations were false and that I would be presenting it to the board. Linda responded within minutes, "You will regret making this public." I screenshot the exchange and added it to my evidence folder. Marcus texted me to say that line was gold and I should hold on to it for the right moment. Tuesday morning, I woke up to the sound of a diesel engine idling in my driveway. I looked out the window and saw a tow truck backing toward my car. I grabbed my phone, pulled on my coat and beanie, and ran outside. The driver was hooking up the tow chain when I reached him. I asked what he was doing, and he said he had a dispatch order from Vista Verde HOA for a violation tow. I told him I was the homeowner, the car was legally parked in my own driveway, and no one from the HOA had authority to tow it. He looked confused and pulled out his phone to call the dispatcher. While he was on the phone, Linda appeared from around the corner, wearing her bright red puffer coat and burgundy knit beanie, clipboard in hand, face set in a smug expression. She said the tow was authorized because I had ignored multiple notices and created a safety hazard. I asked her to show me the signed authorization. She refused. The tow driver hung up and said the dispatcher wanted to speak to both of us. Linda grabbed the phone. I could hear the dispatcher asking Linda for the board president's signature or a property manager authorization number. Linda stammered and said she was the welcome committee chair and had the authority to enforce violations. The dispatcher said that was not sufficient and the tow could not proceed without proper authorization. Linda argued for another minute, then shoved the phone back at the driver and turned to me. She said, "I have witnesses, so do not lie to me." I almost laughed. I pulled out my phone and started recording video. I said, "I am recording this interaction, and I am going to ask you one question. Who authorized this tow?" Linda froze. She looked at the camera, then at the tow driver, then back at me. She said the board had given her blanket authority to handle violations. I asked her to provide documentation. She refused and walked away. The tow driver unhooked my car, apologized, and left. I went inside and called the tow company again. This time I asked for a copy of the dispatch log showing who requested the tow and when. The dispatcher said she could not release it without a formal request, but if I filed a complaint with the company, it would be part of the investigation. I filed the complaint immediately. Marcus called that afternoon and said he had pulled the archived neighborhood group chat messages and found 3 other instances where Linda had threatened tows without authorization. He also found a deleted message thread where another board member had warned Linda to stop making unilateral decisions. I asked Marcus if he could verify the deletion metadata. He said yes, and he would send me a report. I told him I owed him a case of beer. He said he would settle for watching me destroy Linda at the next board meeting. I told him to save the date. The contractor called again to confirm Wednesday, and I told him we were good to go. I spent Tuesday night organizing my evidence into a timeline: door hangers with timestamps, doorbell footage, email chains, group chat screenshots, tow company complaint number, and Marcus's metadata report. I printed everything and put it in a binder. I also printed a blank copy of the HOA covenant with the relevant sections highlighted, showing there was no enforceable handrail frost rule. Wednesday morning, the contractor arrived on time and started the ice dam repairs. Linda appeared within an hour, clipboard in hand, demanding to see the permit. I told her residential roof repairs did not require HOA permits under Kansas law. She said I was wrong and took photos of the contractor's truck. I ignored her and went back inside to work. The contractor finished by early afternoon and said the roof was good for the rest of the winter. I paid him, relieved I had avoided the cancellation fee. That evening, I received an email from the Vista Verde Property Management Company stating the board had scheduled an emergency hearing for Friday to address my repeated violations and failure to comply with notices. The email said I could attend and present a defense, but the board had the authority to impose fines, liens, or other remedies as they saw fit. I replied stating I would attend and I would be bringing documentation. I also forwarded the email to Marcus and asked him to come as a witness. He agreed. Thursday was quiet, but I spent the day refining my presentation. I decided to structure it as a timeline, showing each false claim alongside the contradicting evidence, so the facts would be undeniable even to people who hated drama. I also prepared a separate section on the tow attempt, including the dispatch complaint number and the dispatcher's statement that Linda lacked authority. I did not plan to reveal the dispatch log itself yet, because I wanted to see if Linda would lie about it first. Marcus called Thursday night and said he had finished the metadata report. He found proof that a board member had deleted email threads and altered meeting minutes to remove warnings about Linda's behavior. He said the deletions happened within 24 hours of my public group chat reply, which suggested someone was trying to cover tracks. I asked him to bring printed copies to the hearing. He said he already had them. Friday evening, I arrived at the Vista Verde clubhouse lot 15 minutes early. The parking lot was slushy and the temperature was dropping fast. Marcus pulled up right behind me, carrying a laptop bag and a folder of documents. We walked into the clubhouse together, and I saw Linda already seated at the board table, talking to 2 other board members. She glared at me when I entered. The board president, an older man named Gordon, called the meeting to order and said we were here to address multiple violations filed by the Welcome Committee. He asked Linda to present her case. Linda stood and launched into a 5-minute speech about how I had ignored safety rules, endangered the community, refused to cooperate, and disrespected her authority. She held up the stack of door hangers as evidence and said she had photographic proof of every violation. Gordon asked if I wanted to respond. I said yes. I opened my binder and walked the board through the timeline. I started with the first door hanger and showed the doorbell footage proving the handrail frost claim was weather-related and unenforceable. I moved to the driveway snow removal claim and showed footage of me clearing the driveway hours before the violation notice. I showed the parking violation claim and the footage proving my car was in my own driveway. I showed the certified letters and the email responses Linda had ignored. I showed the group chat exchange where Linda had said, "You will regret making this public," and I pointed out that public shaming was not an appropriate enforcement tool. Gordon looked uncomfortable. Linda interrupted and said I was twisting the facts. I ignored her and continued. I showed the contractor invoice proving the ice dam repairs were completed legally and on time, and I noted that Linda had attempted to interfere without authority. Then I paused and said I had one more item to address, the attempted tow. Linda's face went pale. I pulled out the tow company complaint number and read the dispatcher's statement verbatim. I said Linda had requested a tow without board authorization, in violation of the HOA's own contract with the tow company, and the driver had refused to proceed once he verified the facts. I said I had filed a formal complaint and the tow company was investigating. Linda stood up and shouted that I was lying, that she had every right to enforce violations, and that the board had given her blanket authority. I looked at Gordon and asked if that was true. Gordon hesitated, then said the Welcome Committee had authority to issue notices, but not to authorize tows. Linda turned red. She said the board had always supported her decisions, and this was an attack on her credibility. I said it was not an attack, it was a correction of the record, and I wanted my statement and the evidence entered into the meeting minutes, so it became official. Marcus stood up and said he had additional evidence. He opened his laptop and showed the metadata report proving a board member had deleted emails and altered meeting minutes within 24 hours of my public reply. He said the deletions appeared to be an attempt to hide prior warnings about Linda's unauthorized actions. Gordon demanded to know who had access to the email system. Another board member, a woman named Carol, admitted she had deleted some old messages to clean up the inbox, but she had not realized they were relevant. Marcus asked if she had also altered the minutes. Carol went silent. Gordon said he would need to investigate, and the hearing was getting off track. I said the track was exactly where it needed to be. Linda had been operating without oversight, harassing residents and covering her tracks with the help of board members who did not understand their fiduciary duty. I said I wanted a formal vote to suspend Linda's enforcement authority pending a full review. Linda stood and said if the board suspended her, she would resign and tell everyone the HOA was corrupt. Gordon said that was her choice, but the board had a responsibility to act on credible allegations. He called for a vote. 2 board members voted to suspend Linda's enforcement authority. Carol abstained. Gordon voted yes. Linda grabbed her clipboard and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, during which Gordon agreed to hire an independent management company to review the HOA's enforcement procedures and audit the records for tampering. I asked if the fines and notices against me would be voided. Gordon said yes, effective immediately. I thanked him and left with Marcus. In the parking lot, Marcus said that was the most satisfying board meeting he had ever attended. I told him the show was not over yet. Saturday morning, I woke up to a voicemail from the tow company. The dispatcher said their investigation had confirmed Linda had no authority to request the tow, and they were forwarding the dispatch log to the HOA board and their insurance carrier as part of a liability review. She said the log showed Linda had called the tow line 3 times in the past month requesting tows for other residents, and none of those requests had proper authorization. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Gordon. He replied within an hour saying the board was meeting with the insurance carrier Monday and would likely terminate the management contract with the company that had allowed Linda to operate unchecked. He also said he was recommending the board adopt a formal conflict resolution policy and require all enforcement actions to go through the property manager with documented authorization. I told him that sounded like a good start. Sunday afternoon, Linda showed up at my front porch with a surprise inspection crew, 2 neighbors she had recruited who also served on the welcome committee. I was inside when the doorbell rang. I checked the camera and saw Linda pointing at my handrail, which still had some frost from the overnight freeze, and gesturing for the neighbors to take photos. I grabbed my phone and stepped outside. Linda turned and said she was conducting a follow-up inspection to document ongoing violations. I told her she had been suspended from enforcement authority and had no legal right to be on my property. She said the suspension was temporary and she was exercising her rights as a homeowner to photograph common areas. I pointed out my front porch was not a common area. She ignored me and kept talking to the neighbors. I started recording video and said, "Linda, you are trespassing, and I am asking you to leave." She turned to the camera and said, "I have witnesses, so do not lie to me." I had been waiting for this moment. I stopped recording and said, "Linda, do you remember telling me I would regret making this public?" She blinked. I said, "You were right. I do regret it, because now everyone knows what you have been doing." I pulled out my phone and opened the tow company voicemail on speaker. The dispatcher's voice filled the porch. Linda Remington requested a tow without authorization on 3 separate occasions, none of which had proper board approval. The tow company is forwarding the dispatch log to the HOA board and the insurance carrier. Linda's face went from red to white. The neighbors looked at each other and started backing away. Linda stammered that the voicemail was taken out of context. I said, "Context is exactly what I have. I have a dispatch log showing you requested an illegal tow. I have doorbell footage showing you trespassing. I have emails showing you ignored board warnings. I have metadata showing a board member deleted records to cover for you. And I have this recording of you repeating your catchphrase right before I play the evidence that destroys your credibility. Do you want me to submit this to the board, or do you want to leave my property now?" Linda turned and walked away without another word. The neighbors followed her. I went inside and sent the video and the voicemail to Gordon with a short message. Linda attempted another unauthorized inspection today. Evidence attached. I recommend immediate termination of her committee role. Gordon replied within minutes, agreed. Emergency board vote tomorrow. Thank you for your patience. I forwarded the exchange to Marcus, who sent back a single emoji, a trophy. I spent the rest of Sunday organizing the final evidence packet for the insurance carrier review. I included the dispatch log request, the metadata report, the doorbell footage, the door hangers with timestamps, and a written statement summarizing the timeline. I printed 3 copies and mailed them to the insurance carrier, the board president, and the new property management company Gordon had mentioned. Monday evening, Gordon called and said the board had voted unanimously to remove Linda from the welcome committee and recommend the HOA's insurance carrier require management reforms as a condition of continued coverage. He said the carrier had already flagged the HOA for elevated liability risk due to unauthorized enforcement actions, and they were requiring the board to implement a formal oversight process and third-party audit. He also said the board had voted to void all fines and notices Linda had issued in the past year and refund any payments residents had made under duress. I asked if Linda had resigned from the board entirely. Gordon said she had submitted her resignation that morning, citing personal reasons. I thanked him and hung up. Marcus texted me an hour later. I heard Linda is moving out of the neighborhood. I heard the same rumor, but I did not care enough to verify it. The new property management company took over in early February and immediately sent a welcome packet to every resident with a clear outline of the enforcement process. All violations had to be submitted in writing with photographic evidence, reviewed by the property manager, approved by the board president, and delivered with a 10-day cure period before any fines could be assessed. Towing required written authorization from both the property manager and the board president, and the authorization had to include a specific violation code and photographic evidence. The packet also included a conflict resolution flowchart and a phone number for a third-party mediator. I read the whole thing and filed it in my HOA binder, which I kept in my desk as a souvenir. Marcus came over for dinner the following week and we toasted to bureaucracy that actually worked. He asked if I regretted buying in an HOA neighborhood. I said no, because now I knew how to fight back, and I had a template for anyone else who needed it. March brought warmer weather, and the ice dams melted without any further issues. The contractor sent me a follow-up email saying the repairs had held perfectly and I should not need another service call for at least 2 years. I sent him a 5-star review and a thank you note. The Vista Verde neighborhood group chat stayed quiet for a few weeks, then slowly returned to normal posts about lost pets and garage sales. A new welcome committee chair was appointed in late March, a retired teacher named Robert, who introduced himself with a polite message and a promise to focus on community events instead of enforcement. I met him at a neighborhood cleanup day in April, and he told me he had heard about the Linda situation and wanted to make sure everyone felt the HOA was fair and transparent going forward. I told him I appreciated that, and if he ever needed advice on documentation or audit trails, I was happy to help. He laughed and said he hoped it would not come to that. The doorbell camera stayed in place, snow cap and all, and I kept the footage archive running on a rolling 30-day loop. The stack of door hangers with snow-soaked edges stayed in my evidence binder as a reminder of how quickly an HOA could go off the rails without oversight. I never saw Linda again, but I heard from another neighbor that she had sold her house in May and moved to a non-HOA neighborhood 2 towns over. I did not wish her ill, but I did not miss her either. The Vista Verde HOA board hired a professional management company in June and implemented quarterly audits of all enforcement actions, violation notices, and financial records. The insurance carrier reduced the liability premium after the first clean audit, and Gordon sent a thank you email to the neighborhood, crediting the reforms with saving the HOA thousands of dollars in potential claims. I stayed in the house and kept working my network engineering job, and every time I walked past the front handrail, I remembered the absurdity of a frost violation and the satisfaction of watching a tyrant lose power because she underestimated someone who knew how to document evidence. Marcus and I still joke about the tow truck showdown, and he still brings up the moment I played the dispatcher voicemail on Linda's porch. He says it was the cleanest evidence deployment he has ever seen, and he has worked in IT for 20 years. I tell him it was just logic and patience, but he insists it was poetry. The HOA sent a formal apology letter in July, signed by Gordon and the new property manager, acknowledging the harassment I had endured and thanking me for bringing the enforcement issues to light. The letter said the board had adopted my timeline presentation format as a template for future dispute resolutions, and they were training all committee members on proper documentation and authorization procedures. I framed the letter and hung it in my home office as a trophy. The lakefront community turned out to be everything I had hoped for once the HOA drama was behind me. The dock access was great, the water views were worth the fees, and the neighbors were friendly and respectful. I even joined the architectural review committee in the fall, mostly to make sure no one ever abused the process the way Linda had. The first meeting I attended, Robert welcomed me and said he was glad to have someone with a strong sense of fairness on the team. I told him fairness was easy when you had the facts, and the facts were easy when you documented everything. He nodded and said, "That should be the committee motto." We voted to add a transparency clause to the HOA covenant requiring all enforcement actions to be logged in a public record with timestamps and evidence summaries. The clause passed unanimously, and I felt like I had finally turned the nightmare into something constructive. Winter came around again, and the first snowfall brought back memories of frosted handrails and door hangers with curled edges. I cleared my driveway early, checked the doorbell camera, and made sure everything was documented. No violations appeared. No certified letters arrived. The new property manager sent a friendly reminder email about snow removal best practices, and I replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Marcus texted me a photo of his own driveway with a caption, "No Karens in sight." I sent back a photo of my evidence binder with the caption, "Just in case." He replied with a laughing emoji and the words, "You are ready for anything." I was. The Vista Verde HOA board held its annual meeting in December, and Gordon announced the insurance carrier had renewed the policy at a reduced rate thanks to the improved oversight and audit results. He also announced Linda's replacement on the Welcome Committee had organized 3 successful community events and received 0 complaints. The room applauded. I clapped too, because it felt like proof that systems could be fixed when people held them accountable. I kept the dispatch log request as a permanent file in my evidence archive, even though I never needed to use it again. The tow company had included the full log in their insurance report, and it showed Linda had requested 4 tows total, none with proper authorization, and all within a 3-month window. The log was the smoking gun that forced the board to act, and it was also the detail that made the insurance carrier demand reforms. I had written down every word the dispatcher said during that first phone call, and I had planned to read them back to Linda during the porch confrontation, but the voicemail had done the job even better. Marcus said the dispatch log was the perfect example of why audit trails matter, and he used the story in a presentation at work about data integrity and documentation standards. He sent me a copy of the slide deck, and I saw he had included a sanitized version of the timeline I had presented to the board. He called it a case study in evidence-based conflict resolution. I told him he was a nerd. He said I was the nerd who had won. The spring thaw brought new neighbors to the house Linda had vacated, a young couple with a toddler who introduced themselves at a community picnic and said they had heard Vista Verde had great HOA management. I did not correct them, but I did give them my contact information and told them to reach out if they ever had questions about the rules or the enforcement process. They thanked me and said they appreciated the welcome. Robert overheard and pulled me aside to say the neighborhood had changed for the better since the reforms, and he credited my willingness to fight back as the catalyst. I told him it was not about fighting. It was about facts, and facts were only useful if people were willing to listen. He said the board was listening now, and that was what mattered. I agreed. The toddler ran past us chasing a soccer ball, and Robert laughed and said that was the kind of energy the neighborhood needed. I watched the kid play and thought about how close I had come to walking away from the house, the HOA, and the whole mess. I was glad I had stayed. The final piece of the story came in late summer when the HOA's insurance carrier sent a follow-up letter to the board summarizing the reforms and noting that Vista Verde was now a model for liability reduction in HOA communities. The carrier had shared the case study with other clients as an example of how transparency and documentation could prevent costly disputes and legal exposure. Gordon forwarded the letter to the entire neighborhood with a note thanking everyone for their patience during the transition and emphasizing that the HOA existed to serve the residents, not the other way around. I read the letter twice and saved it in the same folder as the apology letter and the dispatch log. Marcus called me that evening and said he had just read the carrier's letter and it was the perfect ending to the saga. I told him it was not an ending, it was a reset, and the real test would be whether the reforms lasted. He said he had faith in the system now that people like me were watching. I told him I was just one person. He said one person with a binder full of evidence was enough. I still live in the house, and I still work the same network engineering job, and I still check the doorbell camera footage every morning out of habit. The handrail has been frost-free most mornings this fall, but when it does frost up, I smile and remember the absurdity of a safety violation based on weather. The door hangers with snow-soaked edges are still in my evidence binder, curled and faded now, but intact. I have not needed them, but I keep them as a reminder that documentation is power and patience is a weapon. The Vista Verde HOA board meets monthly, and I attend when I can, and every time I walk into that clubhouse I think about the night I laid out the timeline and watched Linda's face go pale. Marcus says I should write a guide for other HOA residents on how to fight back against abuse. I tell him the guide is simple. Document everything, verify the facts, stay calm, and never reveal your trump card until the moment it will do the most damage. He says I should add a section on tow company dispatch logs. I tell him that is an advanced technique. He laughs and says I am a master of advanced techniques. The neighborhood is quiet now, the kind of quiet that comes from people minding their own business and the HOA doing its job without drama. The lakefront is still beautiful, the dock access is still worth the fees, and the rules are still enforced, but fairly and transparently. I see Robert at community events, and he always asks if I have any concerns or feedback, and I always tell him the system is working. He nods and says that is the goal. The new property manager sends monthly reports with violation statistics, resolution timelines, and audit summaries, and the numbers are steady and boring, which is exactly what they should be. I forward the reports to Marcus, who replies with the same message every time: boring is beautiful. I agree. The Vista Verde HOA board voted in a new president this fall, a retired accountant named Helen who campaigned on financial transparency and community engagement. She won by a landslide, and her first act was to publish the HOA's full budget online with line-item explanations. I voted for her, and I told her after the meeting that accountability starts with information. She said she had read the timeline I presented during the Linda crisis, and it had inspired her to run. I told her I was honored. She said the neighborhood owed me a debt. I told her the neighborhood owed itself the willingness to demand better. She smiled and said that was the right answer. I think about Linda sometimes, not with anger, but with a kind of detached curiosity. I wonder if she learned anything from the experience, or if she just found a new neighborhood to terrorize. I hope she learned, but I do not count on it. People who weaponize authority rarely change unless they face real consequences, and even then, the change is fragile. The dispatch log sits in my evidence archive as proof that consequences matter, and the insurance carrier's liability review sits beside it as proof that systems can be reformed. The door hangers with snow-soaked edges are the physical reminder of how close I came to paying fines for violations that never existed, and the doorbell camera footage is the digital reminder of how evidence wins when emotions run hot. Marcus says I should be proud of what I accomplished, and I tell him I am just glad it is over. He says it is never really over, because HOA Karens are everywhere and the next person will need the same tools I used. I tell him the tools are free: a camera, a calendar, a printer, and the willingness to call bullshit when you see it. He says I make it sound easy. I tell him it is easy if you are right and you can prove it. He says that is the hard part. I tell him that is why you document everything. The winter sun is setting earlier now, and the frost is returning to the handrail most mornings, and I still clear my driveway before the notices can arrive, and I still check the camera timestamps, and I still keep the evidence binder within arm's reach. The neighborhood is at peace, the HOA is functional, and the reforms are holding. I won. Not because I was louder or angrier or richer, but because I had the facts, and I knew how to use them. That is the lesson I carry forward, and that is the lesson I will share with anyone who asks. Facts are power. Documentation is a weapon, and patience combined with evidence is unstoppable. Linda learned that the hard way, and the Vista Verde HOA board learned it too, and now the whole neighborhood benefits from a system that works because people like me refuse to let it fail. I did not set out to be a hero. I just wanted to fix my roof and avoid a cancellation fee. But in the process, I dismantled a tyrant, reformed a broken system, and proved that one person with a binder full of evidence can change an entire community. That is enough for me.